John Maynard Keynes once said, "Ideas shape the course of history." History has always been full of ideas which must be remembered. In a small Maine town, Lincoln to be exact, a group of ladies in the early 1930s knew this. Thus, another idea was born into history, the creation of the Lincoln Historical Society. For the last 85 years, the Lincoln Historical Society has grown in knowledge of the Lincoln area history, faced many hardships, and made many friends. The Lincoln Historical Society shares the town's history freely to the public, but very few know the deeper history of the society itself. The Lincoln Historical Society currently resides in the former Coro House on West Broadway. As many drive by to go into town, they are always met with this house and the famous Little Red Schoolhouse across the street. It wasn't always here, however. It has grown and moved many times, as history reveals. I am proud to work with the Lincoln Historical Society and Northern Penobscot Tech to work on this documentary, as we believe it is important to tell the history of the society. It's time they got their spotlight. My name is Riley White, and this is the history of the Lincoln Historical Society. Although we call this the Pinkham era, we have Mary Buzzell to thank for the idea of this museum. In December of 1934, Miss Buzzell gathered a group of ladies together to share her idea that Lincoln's history should be written down and remembered. At this time, it was not a museum, but more records and reports that should not be forgotten. The first official meeting of the Lincoln Historical Society would not be made until next February. On June 10, 1935, the Lincoln Historical Society was finally formed during their 5th meeting, making their name known proudly in the Lincoln area. This forming of the society would change the future of many historical items and buildings. This meeting created the offices needed to keep order. The first president of the LHS was Gertrude Pinkham, resulting in the name of this era.
Bessie Acorn wrote for the Lincoln News in 1961 about Mrs. Buzzell. In writing the story of the Lincoln Historical Society, we are concerned, first, with a person, or persons, chiefly responsible for its being. There would probably have been no society without Mary Buzzell. When the Lincoln Memorial Library opened its doors in March 1925, she was librarian. In 1930, she accepted a position in Bangor Public Library. Due to increasingly ill health, she was obliged to give up work in 1933. In December 1934, Mary's interest in history and genealogy, especially as pertaining to Lincoln, brought about others to discuss the possibility of a society devoted to Lincoln history. On February 4th, 1935, a few of Mary's friends met at her house to make plans. And on February 11th, the first public meeting was held at the library with 10 ladies present. The program for this meeting was 2 papers, one read by Gertrude Mills and the other by Mary Buzzell.
On June 10, 1935, the Lincoln Historical Society was finally formed during their 5th meeting, making their name known proudly in the Lincoln area. This forming of the society would change the future of many historical items and buildings. This meeting created the offices needed to keep order. The first president of the LHS was Gertrude Pinkham, resulting in the name of this era. In July, the Lincoln Historical Society suffered the loss of the woman behind the idea, Mary Buzzell, just days before the next meeting. On this meeting, July 8th, Mary Buzzell was made an honorary member of the society. During the same meeting, the Constitution and bylaws were approved, giving the Lincoln Historical Society a written reminder of their mission and rules, setting in stone the organizational gears behind the face of the group. On March 9, 1936, local Native American Sylvia Stanislaus was given the title of honorary member. At this date, Mrs. Stanislaus had just turned 100 years old. This made her one of the oldest people in Lincoln, born only 7 years after the town was founded. According to November 1940 meeting minutes, a meeting occurred monthly. The available members, 16 for this meeting, would meet at the Lincoln Library. Members would listen to a program by a member chosen the previous month. Ruth Lee read a paper on the history and origin of autograph books during this November meeting. Gifts were given after, being the early donations to the society. Pictures of the Stanislaus family were given by Mabel King, and an old letter was given by Paul Hammerman. The next program would be decided, as well as the refreshment committee for the next meeting. This would be followed by refreshments, consisting of finger foods like cookies or brownies. Now we move to the year 1944, near the end of World War II. Lincoln, fortunately, was a more quiet town, but gave brave men to fight in the war. Back home, the Lincoln Historical Society stayed strong without a true home. This strength was seen by the Eastern Fine Paper Company, who donated land to the society. Plans to build a museum on this land had begun, but was later used to become today's Little Red Schoolhouse Park. In 1962, the Lincoln Historical Society had finally become incorporated, rebranding themselves for many years as the Lincoln Historical Society Incorporated. They were proud of this new incorporation, putting it on many documents for years. In 1965, the Lincoln Historical Society was given the bell of the original Madnockhook Academy after the building was torn down. The bell has its own special story, told in the December issue of the Lincoln News in 1965.
Several of the older Lincoln residents can remember when the bell was rung for the start of each school day, for recess, noon hours, and the close of school. Town meetings were held in the high school each spring, and the bell was always rung for this annual event. When the old high school was torn down, the bell was stored in the firehouse on East Broadway. As time went on, with the adding of new equipment to the firehouse, more room was needed by the firemen, and the bell was placed outside at the rear of the firehouse building. In about 1942, at the time when Fred Gates was police chief, the bell was stolen from its location in the back of the firehouse. It was reported to Mr. Gates, but it had been missing approximately 2 days when it was discovered to be gone. Upon notifying the authorities in southern Penobscot County, it was traced by an authority, and it was located in Bradley in the woods on a side road. It was reported by this authority that the bell had been turned into several junkyards, and the thief or thieves had tried to sell the bell, but no one would buy it. Mr. Gates, upon being notified of the recovery, went down to Bradley and identified it, and had a town truck sent to Bradley to bring it back to Lincoln.
In 1974, the Lincoln Historical Society was seen by the town of Lincoln as an important group, still without a true home. They were given the old primary school by the town, where Lincoln Court Apartments now stands. This saved the school from being demolished by the town or sitting empty for decades more. Very soon after the building was acquired, the museum was opened, showcasing the many items the society had been previously holding in various homes and barns for decades now, as well as other documents. The story is told in this excerpt from Lincoln News article, Lincoln Society Saves School.
The town council answered that need, the need for a building for a museum, in 1974 with the primary school building. Over the years, the collections of the Historical Society had grown and were distributed in barns and attics all over town. The years had taken their toll, but many items have now found a permanent home. The museum officially opened on July 3rd, 1974, with a schoolroom which John Weatherby had put together. John had worked for the school department for several years, and fortunately he had the foresight to put away for future use old clocks, desks, books, etc., as they were phased out of the schools. Now he has a room in the museum of which he can be justly proud.
In June of 1975, the Society was given a paperweight collection, which to this day is proudly showcased in the collection room of the museum. This collection is made up of over 160 paperweights from all around the world, donated by Ruth Peabody McNamara in memory of Dr. Wesley McNamara. In 1976, the Lincoln Historical Society was invited and joined the Maine League of Historical Societies and Museums. This was a big achievement for the Society, as they were now recognized at the state level of museums. A couple months later, in July, the McQuahawk Plantation donated their local hearse to the Society, who unfortunately could not accept it due to having no garage to store it and keep it safe from the weather. The members decided it was best to give their hearse to the Lee Historical Society, the next town over, who had the space for the hearse to be kept in good condition. The primary years were about to come to an end, however, in 1984. The town of Lincoln had been given a bid for the primary school to be demolished and given to somebody else to build on the land. The Society fought to keep the space for many months, but were sadly removed from the building. It was torn down in 1985. Thus begins the Battle of Hill years. The Lincoln Historical Society was allowed to move to the famously known Ballard Hill, which was built in 1918 as a school. Today, it still stands tall and is able to be seen from many places in Lincoln, even from the back windows of the Coro House. The Society began to build their home once again in this new location, making another setup to their museum to share Lincoln's history. In 1995, the Pictorial History of Lincoln was published, showing the history of Lincoln through hundreds of pictures taken over the many years the town had been established. In 1996, the Lincoln Historical Society acquired one of their many pride and joys, the Little Red Schoolhouse. This schoolhouse, built in 1892 as the Weber Mills Schoolhouse, has had a strong history of its own and is similar to the Historical Society in a sense. It originated on the Sweet Road for the cost of $150. In 1919, it moved to the corner of Frost and Lee Streets. At this time, Edna Nealand was a teacher, being paid $12 a week. In around 1924 to 1925, the Weber Mills School closed due to the construction of a new schoolhouse in Lincoln Center. It was sold to Forrest Nealand, who moved it closer to town on Lee Street. It was used as a grocery store here for 20 years. In 1945, Leo Taylor purchased the building and moved it to Mechanic Street. It was rented out to many people, including the Lincoln Credit Union in 1966. It was used by the credit union until March of 1970 when the credit union moved to Taylor Street. In 1976, the Lincoln Bicentennial Committee purchased the building and it moved to the Monadnock Academy school grounds. It was restored to its original school appearance, but over time fell into disrepair. The Lincoln Historical Society began negotiating to obtain the schoolhouse in 1996. In July of 1997, the schoolhouse was moved to its current location on West Broadway, told by Jeanette King.
The Little Red Schoolhouse, as it is known now, and sits on the lot across from the library, at one time was located in Lincoln Center. My father, Robert Libby, and his family went to school there. The first school teacher was so thrilled to have a school because until then, she was teaching in her home. And then the family, Libby family, moved onto Frost Street and they had 10 children, which gave them enough to have a school of their own, which they needed 11 children. And so they acquired the Little Red Schoolhouse, which at the time was white. And as they went to school there were 5 boys in the Libby family that all attended at the same time, so I can imagine that it was a real ruckus. They would tell about going to school, jumping out the windows, and running home. Their father would catch them, bring them back, and another one would jump out. So it was quite amusing that, but not to the teacher, that these boys were there to learn, but were still not real interested in school. When we decided to purchase the schoolhouse or to get it for the Historical Society, I went to the town manager and talked to him about it. He said they were going to tear it down, and I said, would you please give us time to do something about it and to let us know before that happens? And I was told that he would. And then one day, a member of the Historical Society came to me and said, they're tearing the schoolhouse down tomorrow. And I said, they are? And he said, yes. So I immediately got in contact with the town manager. And he said, well, we'll have the equipment there tomorrow. And I said, I thought you were going to let me know about it. And he said, we're going to tear it down. And so I said to him, if we can get it moved, can we have it? He said, all right. I said, can you give me any more time? And he said, maybe a few days. I was working at the bank at the time, and he would come into the bank every day and ask me, have you, we were told we had to contact Boston to get permission because of the light system, and I said, no, I haven't. And so he said to me one day, he said, it's being torn down tomorrow. So I got everybody together on a Tuesday night, and I said, we need to meet and move that. So we contacted a woodsman here in Lincoln, and he said, I'll move that school. So we all got together that night at 4 o'clock, and he loaded it on the back of his truck, and they moved it down through Main Street. I was standing up near where the Chevy place is, and the town manager was on the steps over at what was the town hall then. The police came along, and he said to me, are you with that truck? And I said, yes. And he said, do you have a permit? And I said, ask the driver. We didn't have a permit. He went and spoke to the driver, then he went over and spoke to the town manager, and the town manager just throws his hands out and shrugs and walks away. And we continued with the schoolhouse. And we moved it down and placed it on the lot where it is now. And it didn't cost us a penny, and everyone has been happy to see it there, have good memories of their parents, grandparents going to school there, and we are just so happy to have the Little Red Schoolhouse.
Since then, many renovations have occurred to the building, and maintenance is kept up to date in the schoolhouse park. In 1997, the town of Lincoln offered the Historical Society a lakeside building. The building had served as the store building for Martin's. Even before that, it had served as a skating rink and bowling alley. The society accepted the town's offer at first, but later declined as the society was grateful for Ballard Hill, and upkeep of both buildings would prove costly for the society. In 1998, the building burned. It was very fortunate the Historical Society had not taken up the offer. Also in 1998, the Society bought the Clay House, which sits next to the Lincoln News Building on West Broadway. 1998 was the beginning of a new age of the Historical Society, some for better, some for worse.
In 1999, the Lincoln Historical Society was forced to move out of Ballard Hill and go to the Clay House full-time. Their files in both the Ballard Hill building as well as the Lincoln Library had to be moved due to the town requiring more space for their own storage.
In April of 1999, the Lincoln Pulp and Paper Company was yet again a big help to the Historical Society, donating $1,000 to help in buying the Clay House. In 2000, the Clay House Museum finally opened to the public. The Historical Society have a true museum again. The Coro years began on May 5, 2009. On this date, the Lincoln Historical Society leased the Coro House, saving it from being torn down like many of the other buildings in the Society's history. The Coro House is one of the oldest buildings in Lincoln, built in 1836. It belonged to many families, but is famously known as the Coro House due to the Coro family. Quoting History of the Coro House, written by Jeanette King,
research seems to indicate that the Coro House was built sometime in the mid-1830s. The property itself was originally owned by Amos Patton and conveyed to Ira Fish in July of 1836, probably as part of the Ira Fish Griston Lumber Mill property. It was located at the edge of Manadalcook Stream on what is now Lincoln Library property. In April 1837, Ira Fish sold part of the property to Jacob W. Stinchfield, who may have built the house around the same time of his wedding to Mary Hammond in 1837. 4 children were born soon after the marriage, possibly in this very house. Records show that in 1864, Stinchfield sold the house and property to Dr. Moses Wilson. The house remained in the Wilson family until 1922, and after that, the house was owned by the McNamara family. In 1944, it went to Mary McNamara Weatherby, who was widowed in 1938, and married to Joseph Coro in 1947. After Joseph and Mary's deaths, the town of Lincoln bought the property in March 2006 for future expansion of the Lincoln Library. In the fall of 2008, When the town was considering tearing down the historical building, the Lincoln Historical Society sprang into action and mobilized an ultimately successful campaign to save the house from demolition. In May 2009, the town of Lincoln voted to enter into a lease agreement with the Lincoln Historical Society for just $1 a year for a period of 10 years, with the Lincoln Historical Society assuming all costs of renovations, insurance, and ongoing expenses.
In 2010, the Lincoln News burned after an accident, leaving the Lincoln News without a home and Lincoln without a newspaper. The Lincoln Historical Society jumped into action, allowing the Lincoln News to function out of the Clay House while the new building was being constructed on the site of the old building. In 2015, the Lincoln Historical Society had gained ownership of the Coro House, giving them the rights to the property. This building would not be torn down as long as the Historical Society could help it. We have now arrived at the digitalization age, which is still in its early stages. The digitalization age began with the activation of the Historical Society computers, which still ran older Windows systems. Upgraded and moved to spaces where they'd be used, the Historical Society began to be brought into the present. A very dedicated group had also risen from this, the Technology Committee. With a small group of members, the Lincoln Historical Society is currently undergoing the process of digitizing their inventory with newly bought laptops, giving them a more up-to-date list of their thousands of museum items. This documentary is another big part of the digitalization age, being the first and only video documenting the Historical Society's history. The Lincoln Historical Society has had just as much history as the town itself, having many homes, members, and troubles. From 1935 to 2021, the Society has fought to make themselves the best they can be, learning and growing with what they are able to use. These members are thrifty and make sure their plans are well thought out before they happen, which has led the Society to exist over 85 years later.